Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The city of Fortaleza, Brazil, wakes on Monday, August 8, 2005. Like any other day, it is the capital of Ceará, a sun-bleached state on the country's northeastern coast, a place of vibrant commerce and sprawling beaches where the relentless Atlantic sun glints off the high-rises lining the shore. Commuters navigate the morning traffic, their cars a river of steel flowing through the city's arteries. Shopkeepers roll up their metal grates, the sound a familiar clatter that signals the start of business. And inside the imposing, almost brutalist concrete facade of the Banco Central, the nation's central bank, employees prepare for the week. They are custodians of a nation's wealth, their days governed by routines hardened by years of practice, a ballet of keys and codes and checklists designed to protect a fortune. The air inside is cool, controlled, a stark contrast to the humid heat outside. It smells of paper and metal and quiet authority. But on this particular Monday, the rhythm is broken. It is broken by a silence where there should be sound, an emptiness where there should be substance, a violation so profound and so subtle that the mind struggles to accept it. Inside the bank's main vault, a fortress within a fortress, employees begin their morning count. This space is the heart of the institution, a sanctuary of security. Its walls and floor are a monolithic slab of steel-reinforced concrete nearly 4 feet thick, designed to withstand any conceivable assault. It is monitored by a web of motion sensors, vibration detectors, and surveillance cameras. To enter is to pass through a series of checkpoints that would rival a military installation. But as the staff go about their duties, a strange anomaly comes into focus. A section of the floor, usually a seamless expanse of polished gray, is disturbed. And in its center is something impossible, a hole. It is a nearly perfect square, a dark geometric wound in the concrete. Below it, a chasm, and all around it, an unbelievable void. 5 massive steel-strapped containers, each holding millions of Brazilian reais, are simply gone. The money itself, an estimated 164,700,000 reais, worth $71.6 million at the time, has vanished. The initial moments are a flurry of confused disbelief. An inside job, a technical malfunction. The security logs are checked. No alarms were triggered. The seismic sensors registered nothing. The surveillance tapes show nothing but an empty, silent vault all weekend. It is as if the money simply evaporated, siphoned from the earth by a phantom force. The first investigators to arrive on the scene can only stand at the edge of the hole, peering into the darkness, baffled. The scene speaks not of a robbery, a crime of violence and force, but of a magic trick, a grand illusion performed on a national scale. It was a crime of absolute silence. What they would soon discover was an act of almost unbelievable audacity, discipline, and ingenuity. A crime that was less a smash and grab and more a subterranean construction project, a masterpiece of criminal engineering executed over 3 months with the patience of saints and the precision of surgeons. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, the heist itself, the silent, brilliant act of theft, is only the first movement in a 2-part symphony. The second is a brutal, chaotic descent into paranoia, betrayal, and bloodshed. The silence of the tunnel would be answered by the scree of its creators. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a tunnel heist. We will explore the meticulous, subterranean world of its construction, a realm of silent cooperation and shared purpose. And then, we will climb out into the blinding sunlight to witness how the very fortune they unearthed would become a curse. turning partners into prey and shattering their disciplined conspiracy into 100 violent pieces. The idea, like many audacious plans, began with a simple observation coupled with deep criminal intelligence. The Banco Central in Fortaleza wasn't just any commercial bank branch. It was a regional repository for the Brazilian government, a clearinghouse for currency. It held vast sums of cash, but the thieves were not interested in the new, crisp bills fresh from the mint. Their target was specific: the used and worn banknotes that had been taken out of circulation, waiting to be either reissued or incinerated. These 50 reais notes had three characteristics that made them the perfect loot. First, they were old and soft, making them lighter and more compressible than new bills. Second, their serial numbers were not recorded in any easily accessible database, as they were considered decommissioned. And third, because of this, they were functionally untraceable. For a potential thief, this was the holy grail, a fortune that could be spent with near impunity. The challenge wasn't the quality of the prize, but its location. The vault was a modern fortress. A frontal assault was suicide. A digital attack on the central bank systems was the stuff of movies, not reality. The only way in was to bypass the defenses entirely. The only way in was from below. The genesis of the plot is often credited to a handful of men, but two names consistently rise to the surface as the architects of the operation: Antonio Josephine Alves dos Santos, known as Alemão, or the German for his fair complexion, and Luis Fernando Ribeiro, who went by the alias Fernandinho. They were not common street thugs. They were high-level organizers with deep ties to the Primeiro Comando da Capital, or PCC, one of Brazil's most powerful and sophisticated criminal organizations. The PCC, born in the violent prisons of São Paulo, had evolved from a prison gang into a transnational criminal enterprise, involved in everything from drug trafficking to arms dealing. They were known for their strict hierarchy, code of conduct, and their ability to plan and execute complex, large-scale operations. Alemão was the alleged mastermind, a cool-headed planner with a reputation for logistical brilliance, a man who saw crime as a series of engineering problems to be solved. Fernandinho was the charismatic financier and field commander, the man who could raise the necessary capital, bring the right people together, and command their loyalty through a mixture of fear and respect. They understood that this heist couldn't be accomplished with muscle. It required capital, an estimated $200,000 just for startup costs, as well as expertise, and above all, a profound, almost monastic patience. Their first step was to assemble a team, not of gunmen, but of specialists. They put out feelers through the criminal underworld, seeking out individuals with specific, verifiable skills. They recruited civil engineers who could read city blueprints and perform complex geodesic calculations. They found excavation experts, men who had likely worked in mining or construction, who understood the unique challenges of digging in different types of soil. They brought in electricians, mechanics, and logistics experts. The final crew would number around 25 to 30 men, a small clandestine army dedicated to a single, silent goal. Each man was reportedly promised a share of the eventual prize, a sum so vast it would guarantee them a life of luxury. But the price of admission was 3 months of their lives, spent in secrecy, toiling in the dark. Their second task was to find a base of operations. This couldn't be a random warehouse on the outskirts of town. It needed to be close, incredibly close. Every extra foot of tunnel meant more time, more risk, more dirt to dispose of. After weeks of meticulous scouting, Reviewing city maps and conducting on-the-ground surveillance, they found the perfect property, a modest, unassuming house for rent at number 1071 on the Rua 25 de Marco. From a satellite's perspective, it was just one city block away from the bank, a straight shot of 78 meters. From the ground, it was an anonymous commercial building on a busy street, sandwiched between other small businesses. Its very mundanity was its greatest asset. It was a place no one would ever look at twice. To avoid suspicion, they needed a legitimate, plausible reason to be there. So, in May of 2005, 3 months before the heist, they created one. They established a front company called Grama Sintetica, or synthetic grass. It was a stroke of genius, a piece of misdirection so perfect it verged on parody. The business was plausible. Landscaping and artificial turf were a growing industry in a sun-drenched city like Fortaleza. More importantly, it provided the perfect cover for their primary activity, digging. A business like this would naturally involve trucks coming and going at all hours, carrying tools, supplies, and, crucially, hauling away large quantities of soil and rock. Who would question a landscaping company removing dirt? They printed business cards and flyers. They put up a large, professional-looking sign on the front of the house. To the outside world, they were just another small enterprise trying to make it. They approached the landlord, paid several months' rent up front in a thick stack of cash, explaining that as a new business, they preferred to handle their finances this way. The landlord, happy to have a paying tenant, asked few questions. With the cover established, the real work began. The house became a sealed-off staging ground. The first step was to soundproof the interior rooms, especially the one from which the digging would commence. They lined the walls with insulating material to muffle the inevitable noise of power tools. Then, from a room in the back of the house, they took sledgehammers to the concrete floor, broke through, and began their descent. The target was the bank vault, 78 meters away. But they couldn't just dig a straight line. They needed to go down first, deep enough to pass under the street, under the complex and unseen web of water pipes, sewer lines, high-pressure gas mains, and fiber optic cables that form the hidden anatomy of any modern city. A single mistake here, severing a major utility line, would bring the authorities down on them in an instant. Using city blueprints, likely acquired through bribery or theft, they plotted their course. They dug vertically for 13 feet or 4 meters straight down into the earth. This initial phase was grueling. They worked in relentless shifts, a subterranean ballet of coordinated labor. Teams of 7 to 10 men would be on duty at any one time. The air in the confined shaft quickly grew thick with dust, and the tropical heat of Fortaleza, trapped underground, became suffocating. They used basic tools, shovels, pickaxes, and buckets on a rope and pulley system. The excavated earth, a mixture of sandy soil and clay, was painstakingly bagged in heavy-duty sacks, each weighing up to 80 pounds. These bags were then carried up the ladder to the surface, where they were stacked, waiting for the cover of night. Under darkness, the Grama Sintetica company trucks would be loaded, and the evidence of their progress would be driven away and dumped at various locations around the city. From construction sites to inconspicuous landfill spots, the sheer volume was immense. Police would later estimate they removed over 80 tons of soil and rock, one 80-pound bag at a time, all under the noses of their neighbors and the city. It was a slow, agonizing process, a battle of inches fought in the dark. Once they reached the desired depth of 4 meters, they turned 90 degrees and began the horizontal push toward the bank. And this is where the operation transformed from mere manual labor into a feat of sophisticated engineering. The tunnel wasn't a crude, rough-hewn hole in the ground. It was a professionally constructed corridor. It measured about 2.5 feet square, 70 centimeters, just enough room for a single person to crawl through on their stomach or hands and knees. To prevent the sandy, unstable soil from collapsing, the walls and ceiling were immediately reinforced with heavy wooden beams and paneling, forming a box-like structure that resembled a classic mineshaft. The entire length of this wooden frame was then lined with thick plastic sheeting, a crucial detail to keep out the groundwater that constantly seeped through the porous earth below the city. This wasn't just about structural integrity, it was about creating a viable, long-term workspace, keeping the tunnel relatively dry and stable for the months of work ahead. The level of sophistication was staggering. From the house, they ran a heavy-gauge electrical line down into the tunnel. This powered a string of bare light bulbs that illuminated the entire 256-foot passage. It was a dim, claustrophobic light, casting long, dancing shadows, but it allowed them to work with precision and safety. More impressively, they installed a ventilation system. A series of interconnected plastic tubes ran the length of the tunnel, connected to powerful fans on the surface. This system circulated fresh air into the suffocating depths and pulled out the stale carbon dioxide-laden air, making the months of strenuous labor physically possible. Some reports, likely embellished over time but rooted in the impressive reality of the setup, even claim they had a small air conditioning unit, pumping cool air into the passage, and a basic intercom system to allow the diggers at the tunnel face to communicate with the crew back in the house. Whether or not those specific details are true, the core engineering was brilliant. It was a self-contained, self-sufficient subterranean world, built for a single purpose. The digging process settled into a monotonous, physically punishing rhythm. At the front of the tunnel, a man would lie on his stomach, using a small shovel or a hand pick to chip away at the earth. He would scrape the dirt back between his legs to the man behind him. That man would load it into a bucket or onto a small, custom-built cart that ran on a rudimentary track made of wooden planks. A human chain, a subterranean bucket brigade, would then move the earth, container by container, all the way back to the vertical shaft. There, another team would haul it up to the house. The work was organized with military precision. Shifts were strictly managed, typically lasting 4 to 6 hours, to keep the men as fresh as possible and prevent exhaustion-related mistakes. The off-duty men would eat, sleep, and live inside the sealed house. They cooked their own meals, mostly high-protein, non-perishable foods. They rarely, if ever, left the compound. They knew that a single mistake, a loud argument overheard by a neighbor, a truck being loaded too conspicuously, a single man seen too often, could bring the entire operation crashing down, both literally and figuratively. For 3 months, from May to early August, this was their entire reality. The damp earth, the smell of sweat and soil, the constant hum of the ventilation fans, the dim glow of the light bulbs, and the rhythmic, percussive sound of digging. As they neared their target, their reliance on technology increased. The engineers on the team used sophisticated tools. GPS devices on the surface, combined with compasses, levels, and laser sighting tools underground, ensured their trajectory was perfect. They had to account for the slight slope of the street above, the exact depth of the vault's foundation, everything. They couldn't afford to be off by even a few feet. Missing the vault would mean the entire 3-month, multi-$100,000 effort was for nothing. Finally, in the first week of August 2005, their calculations told them they had arrived. Their instruments confirmed it. They were directly beneath the floor of the vault of the Banco Central. The most difficult part of the journey was over. But the most dangerous part was about to begin. The final obstacle was a barrier of steel-reinforced concrete interwoven with a mesh of thick rebar, a solid 1.1 meters, nearly 4 feet thick. They chose their moment with the same meticulous care they had applied to everything else. Friday afternoon, August 5th, they knew the bank would close for the weekend, giving them a window of more than 60 hours to complete their work, retrieve the money, and disappear. As the last bank employees left for the day, the team in the tunnel began the final assault. Using diamond-tipped industrial drills and powerful pneumatic hammers, all powered by the electrical line from the house, they began to attack the vault floor from below. The noise must have been deafening inside the tunnel, a violent, bone-charring roar that was a stark contrast to the secrecy and silence they had maintained for months. But 4 meters underground, muffled by tons of earth and the thick concrete itself, the sound was undetectable on the surface. For hours, they drilled and hammered, methodically chewing through the concrete, cutting through the steel rebar with grinders. And then it happened. A piece of the floor gave way. Dust and debris rained down. For the first time in 3 months, the diggers saw something other than dirt and wood and plastic. They saw the cold, polished floor of the vault. They carefully widened the opening, creating a passage just large enough for a person to climb through. The first man, likely one of the leaders, emerged from the ground into a cavern of unimaginable wealth. Before them stood the 5 containers, each packed to the brim with 50 reais banknotes. They ignored everything else. They knew exactly what they had come for: the untraceable, non-sequential bills. The final phase of the operation was a masterpiece of logistics. One by one, they broke open the containers and began to pass the bundles of cash down through the hole, forming another human chain. The money was moved through the tunnel back to the house, a river of currency flowing beneath the sleeping city of Fortaleza. The sheer weight of the haul was a challenge in itself. The stolen cash weighed approximately 3.5 tons. It took them the entire weekend, all of Saturday and most of Sunday, to move it all. As they worked, the surface team executed the final part of the plan. They began to dismantle the Grama Sintetica business. They painted over the logo on their company van, erasing their corporate identity. They loaded the arriving cash into specially modified vehicles, packing it into hidden compartments. By the time the sun rose on Sunday, they were preparing to scatter to the 4 winds. The last man to leave the tunnel pulled a ladder up through the hole. Back at the house, they performed a final, hurried cleanup. They sprinkled the property with powdered lime, a classic criminal tactic to mask any scents and deter sniffer dogs. They wiped down every conceivable surface to remove fingerprints. They left behind the tools, the empty food containers, the discarded clothes, the mundane artifacts of their extraordinary endeavor. Then, in small groups, they vanished. By Monday morning, when the first bank employee walked into the vault and stared in utter disbelief at the hole in the floor, the gang was already gone, melting into the vastness of Brazil with $71 million. The perfect crime was complete. The scene that greeted the Brazilian Federal Police on that Monday morning was one of profound, almost professional bewilderment. The country's most secure bank vault had been breached, and there was no evidence of how. The hole in the floor was the only clue, a silent testament to a crime of impossible patience. The investigation, immediately codenamed Operation Tupara or Operation Mole, began with a descent into that hole. What the investigators found was breathtaking. The tunnel was not the crude burrow of amateurs. It was a marvel of subterranean construction. The lighting, the ventilation, the structural reinforcements, it all pointed to a level of planning, funding, and expertise far beyond that of typical bank robbers. This was the work of a professional, well-funded syndicate. The trail, logically, began at the other end of the tunnel, in the rented house on Rua 25 de Marco. Inside, the police found the debris of a 3-month siege: empty water bottles, discarded packaging from high-energy foods, and the tools of the trade: shovels, drills, and cutting equipment. The thieves had been disciplined in their execution, but not flawless in their cleanup. In their haste to disappear, they left behind the first crucial pieces of evidence that would begin to unravel their perfect crime. Forensic teams in white suits scoured the house and the tunnel, and despite the perpetrators' attempts to use lime and wipe surfaces, they found what they were looking for. On a plastic water bottle, they lifted a clear fingerprint. On a discarded piece of tape, a stray hair. The science of DNA analysis was still developing in Brazil's regional labs at the time, but the fingerprint was a solid, old-fashioned lead. It was run through the National Criminal Database, and it got a hit. The print belonged to a man named José Charles Machado Moraes, a career criminal with a record of property crimes. With his identity, the police had their first thread to pull from the tangled conspiracy. The cover story, the Grama Sintética Company, provided another vital avenue of investigation. Detectives quickly traced the purchase of a white Ford F-250 pickup truck that had been used by the company. They visited the dealership where it was bought and interviewed the salesman. He remembered the transaction clearly. A group of men, paying with a thick wad of cash, had purchased the vehicle. He even remembered a name one of them had used: Paulo Sergio de Souza. More importantly, the salesman recalled that one of the men had provided a driver's license to take the truck for a test drive, a standard dealership policy. The dealership had made a photocopy. The police recovered the document. The photo on the license was cross-referenced with their database of known high-level criminals. It was a perfect match for Luis Fernando Ribeiro, Fernandinho, the charismatic leader and financier. Suddenly, the investigators had two names, two faces to connect to the faceless conspiracy. They had a foot soldier and a general. The investigation then turned digital, following the money trail backwards. The criminals had needed to set up their front company, rent the house, and buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. They had left a faint paper trail. By cross-referencing names and known associates of Moraes and Ribeiro, a wider network began to emerge. But the real breaks in the case would not come from police work alone. They would come from the fatal flaws of the criminals themselves. The greatest challenge for any criminal who pulls off a massive heist is not getting the money. It's keeping it and keeping quiet about it. The men who had worked together in perfect, disciplined harmony for 3 months in the suffocating darkness underground began to fall apart the moment they surfaced into the intoxicating light of unimaginable wealth. The gang had a pact, forged in the tunnel: everyone lies low, no extravagant purchases, no sudden changes in lifestyle. Let the heat die down for at least a year, melt back into society. It was a pact that was almost immediately and spectacularly broken. The psychological pressure of possessing millions in cash, coupled with the egos of men who believed they had gotten away with the crime of the century, proved to be an explosive combination. Within weeks of the heist, stories began to trickle in to police from informants across Brazil. A man in a small town buys 10 brand new cars from a single dealership in a single afternoon, paying for them all in cash, handing out the keys to stunned relatives like party favors. Another is arrested after a drunken bar fight, and when police search his car, they find it stuffed with hundreds of thousands of reais in 50 real notes. The lure of sudden wealth was too strong. The quiet discipline that had defined the heist was replaced by the loud, reckless arrogance of the newly rich. One of the first to be caught was Davi Silvano da Silva. He was arrested just a few weeks after the robbery, trying to buy an entire fleet of luxury cars. In his possession, police found over 6 million reais, still bundled in the Banco Central's wrappers. His arrest led to others. Each captured gang member became a potential informant, a weak link in the chain of silence. Faced with decades in prison, some talked. They gave up names, locations, and details of the operation. The silent conspiracy of the tunnel was being broken apart by interrogations in brightly lit police stations across the country. The police also got a lucky break that illustrated the gang's logistical overreach. A routine traffic stop hundreds of miles from Fortaleza pulled over a large truck, a car transporter hauling several new vehicles. The driver seemed unusually nervous. A search revealed the truth. Hidden inside the chassis and door panels of the brand-new cars were millions in stolen cash. The truck driver was a low-level courier, but he knew who had paid him, and his testimony led investigators further up the chain. The net was tightening. The federal police were methodical, patiently following the money and piecing together the sprawling network. They eventually identified more than 30 people directly involved, from the masterminds and engineers down to the manual laborers, lookouts and money launderers. Arrests began to pile up. Within a year of the heist, a significant portion of the gang was behind bars. Among those still at large was Alemão, the alleged mastermind Antonio Josevan Alves dos Santos. He was more disciplined than the others. He had managed to evade capture for more than 2 years, living under a false identity in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Brasília, the nation's capital. He had been careful, using sophisticated methods to launder his share of the money through legitimate businesses, including a transport company. But even the most careful fugitive can make a mistake. A slip-up, a phone call to a known criminal associate that was being monitored by federal agents, led the police to his door in February of 2008. His arrest was a major victory for the investigation, a symbolic capstone to the manhunt. With the supposed architect of the heist in custody, it seemed like the story was finally coming to a close. But the story of the Fortaleza heist is not a simple tale of crime and punishment. It is a story of how a fortune can become a deadly curse. The violence that had been so conspicuously absent from the heist itself began to plague its aftermath with savage intensity, and no story illustrates this more horrifically than that of Luis Fernando Ribeiro, Fernandinho. After the heist, Fernandinho fled Fortaleza with his share of the loot, an estimated 10 million reais. He was smart enough not to go on a wild spending spree. He moved to the state of Minas Gerais, bought a large ranch, and attempted to transform himself into a legitimate businessman, laundering his money through cattle and real estate. But he made one fatal mistake. He trusted the wrong people, and in the criminal underworld, news of a massive score travels fast. Fernandinho, with his newfound wealth, became a prime target. In October 2005, just 2 months after the heist, he was kidnapped. His captors were not random criminals. According to widespread reports and subsequent investigations, they were a group that included corrupt police officers. They knew who he was, what he had done, and most importantly, how much he had. They demanded a ransom of 2 million reais from his family. His family paid, and Fernandinho was released. But he was now a marked man. He was exposed, and his kidnappers knew he still had millions more. He desperately tried to disappear again, moving his family to the sprawling metropolis of São Paulo, but his pursuers were relentless. The criminal world, once it sinks its teeth into a man like that, does not let go. The precise details of what happened next are murky, tangled in the code of silence that governs both the criminal underworld and the corrupt elements of law enforcement who prey on it. But what is known is that Fernandinho was kidnapped a second time. This time, there was no ransom demand. This time, his captors wanted everything. His body was found on October 7, 2005, dumped on a remote, dusty road outside of São Paulo. He had been shot 7 times. The man who had helped lead a $71 million heist, who had commanded the loyalty of 24 men in a claustrophobic tunnel for 3 months, died alone in the dirt, executed for the very money he had stolen. The message to the rest of the gang was clear and terrifying. There was no honor among these thieves, and there was no safe harbor from the violence that the money attracted. Fernandinho's murder was just the beginning of the bloodbath. The $71 million acted like a magnet for violence, drawing in rival gangs, extortionists, and corrupt officials. The members of the Fortaleza crew, scattered across Brazil, were hunted men, not just by the police, but by each other. Paranoia, the great destroyer of criminal enterprises, set in. The gang that had trusted each other with their lives in the tunnel now suspected betrayal around every corner. Anyone who was captured was a potential informant. Anyone who was still free was a potential rival for the remaining loot. The body count began to climb, a grim tally of the heist's true cost. Anselmo de Oliveira Facana, one of the diggers, was found shot to death. Evandro José das Neves was kidnapped and killed in São Paulo. Another member was gunned down in his home by masked assailants. A man believed to have been one of the tunnel's engineers was found dead, his body showing signs of extensive torture, suggesting his killers were trying to extract the location of his hidden share. In total, at least 8 members of the original gang were murdered in the months and years following the heist. Some were killed by criminals trying to extort their money. Some were killed in shootouts with the police who were hunting them. And some, it is widely believed, were killed by their former partners, silenced to protect the conspiracy, to settle old scores over the division of the spoils, or simply to claim a larger share. One of the most dramatic episodes in this violent aftermath involved the man whose fingerprint was the very first clue, José Charles Machado Moraes. After being identified, he went on the run, becoming one of the most wanted men in Brazil. The police tracked him for months, finally locating him in a house in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. When they moved in to arrest him, Moraes did not surrender. A fierce gun battle erupted, turning the quiet residential street into a war zone. When the smoke cleared, Moraes was dead. The man who left the first trace of evidence became another casualty of the heist's bloody legacy. The violence was not just internal. The sheer amount of untraceable cash injected into the criminal ecosystem had a profoundly destabilizing effect. It funded turf wars between drug factions, financed massive arms purchases from Paraguay, and corrupted countless public officials. The ripple effects of the Fortaleza heist spread far beyond the original conspirators, fueling a wave of secondary crimes across the country for years. The police investigation, meanwhile, continued its slow, grinding work. By 2010, 5 years after the heist, nearly every known member of the gang had been either arrested or was dead. The trials that followed were complex, resulting in long prison sentences for the key players. Alamau, the mastermind, was sentenced to 49 years in prison, though this was later reduced on appeal. Others received sentences ranging from a few years for minor roles to several decades for the core members. Yet, for all the arrests and all the bloodshed, one great mystery remains. The money. Of the 164,700,000 reais stolen from the vault, authorities have only ever recovered about 20 million. The rest, more than 140 million reais, or roughly $60 million by 2005 exchange rates, has never been found. It has vanished, laundered into businesses, converted into real estate and luxury goods, buried in the ground on remote farms, or simply spent and absorbed into the vast anonymous economy of a country of over 200 million people. It is a ghost fortune, a treasure that continues to haunt the imaginations of both law enforcement and the criminal underworld, a permanent testament to the gang's partial success. The story of the aftermath is a brutal lesson in human nature. The same group of men who demonstrated superhuman discipline, cooperation, and ingenuity in the pursuit of a common goal were utterly incapable of managing its success. The bonds forged in the darkness and shared risk of the tunnel dissolved instantly in the blinding light of wealth. Greed, paranoia, and ego shattered the conspiracy from within, proving to be far more destructive forces than any police investigation. The engineering of the tunnel was a work of criminal genius, but the engineering of their escape, of their new lives, was a catastrophic, bloody failure. They had a perfect plan to get the money, but no plan at all for what came after. The silence and order of their subterranean world gave way to a cacophony of chaos and violence on the surface, a brutal coda to their brilliant crime. In the end, the anatomy of the Fortaleza bank heist is a study in profound contrasts. It is a story of meticulous, patient planning and reckless, immediate abandon. It is a story of silent, disciplined labor and loud, brutal violence. It is a story of a team that worked in perfect, interdependent harmony to achieve the impossible, only to tear itself apart over the spoils the moment that interdependence was gone. The heist itself was a testament to what a dedicated, skilled group can accomplish when united by a singular, audacious goal. The aftermath was a testament to how easily that unity can be destroyed by the corrosive elemental power of greed and fear. The legacy of the heist is therefore twofold. It is remembered, and will always be remembered, in the annals of crime as one of the most brilliant and audacious robberies ever executed. The tunnel is the stuff of legend, a symbol of criminal creativity and engineering prowess that borders on the mythic. But it is also remembered as a cautionary tale, a story written in blood. The vast majority of those who crawled through that tunnel to get rich either ended up in a prison cell or a coffin. The $71 million prize brought not freedom, but a relentless and deadly curse. Luis Fernando Ribeiro, the charismatic leader, died for it. Alamão, the meticulous planner, will spend the majority of his life behind bars because of it, and dozens of others had their lives destroyed by it. The investigation, Operation Mole, was a success in that it dismantled the syndicate and brought many of its members to justice. But the ghost of the missing 140 million reais still lingers. It represents a colossal failure of recovery, a fortune that successfully seeped into the cracks of the world and was lost forever. It serves as a permanent reminder that while the criminals were caught, the crime, in a purely financial sense, largely paid off for the larger network that ultimately absorbed the funds. The case reveals a fundamental truth about criminal conspiracies and human nature, a truth that no amount of engineering or planning can overcome. They had built a perfect tunnel to the money, but had dug no escape from themselves. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.